Nadine Okafor was 40 years old, and for 2 years and 4 months she had believed she was watching the man she loved die. She had sold her grandmother's house. She had cashed out her retirement account, every dollar of it, at a penalty that would take years to recover from. She had taken a second job on weekends cleaning offices in downtown Memphis because the specialist in Houston charged what specialists in Houston charged. And because she had looked at Marcus Okafor across a hospital bed and decided there was no accounting for love. She drove a car she could no longer afford to repair and ate meals she could no longer afford to choose, and did it all without complaint. Because that was the kind of woman she was, and because Marcus had told her, with the particular exhausted gratitude of a dying man, that he did not know what he would do without her. He was not dying. She followed him to the gym on a Tuesday morning in October when she was supposed to be at work and he was supposed to be at his bi-weekly infusion appointment. And she sat in her car in the parking lot of a facility she had never seen before and watched her terminally ill husband do 45 minutes of free weights followed by 20 minutes on a stationary bike, which she photographed through the windshield with a steadiness she did not feel. He had collected $214,000 from her in documented transfers over 28 months. What Marcus did not know, what he had never once considered in 2 years and 4 months of elaborate deception, was that Nadine's grandmother had been a contract attorney, and that Nadine had spent 2 years working in her office after college, and that she knew, with a precision she had never had reason to use against him, exactly what fraud looked like when it was documented correctly. What happened in the district attorney's office 6 weeks later would not go the way Marcus Okafor had planned any part of his future. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The morning light came in low through the kitchen window the way it did every October in Memphis, amber and specific. The kind of light that made everything it touched look like it had already been considered carefully. Nadine sat with her coffee at the small table in the corner, the one she had refinished herself 3 summers ago when the laminate had begun to peel, sanded it down to bare wood, stained it twice, sealed it with the patience of a woman who had grown up in a house where you did not discard what could be restored. She ran her thumb across the grain the way she did most mornings. It was a steadying thing, small and private. She was a licensed paralegal and had been for 15 years, working at a mid-sized civil litigation firm in Memphis where she was known, among the attorneys she supported, as the person you gave the complicated cases to because she read everything twice and remembered what she read. She was quiet and methodical and had a gift for finding the detail in a document stack that changed the shape of the whole case. She had applied this same reading to her personal life with the same discipline, which was why the last 2 years had cost her more than money. She had believed the documents. She had believed the diagnosis. Her grandmother, Adeze Okonkwo, had practiced contract law in Memphis for 31 years before she retired and then died in the same month, as though she had been waiting until the work was done before she allowed herself to stop. She had been the kind of attorney who wrote her own clauses, the kind whose contracts other attorneys reviewed and then revised their own work after reading. She had told Nadine, in the office above the dry cleaner on Beale Street, where Nadine had spent 2 years filing and cross-referencing and learning without knowing she was learning, the document is not what someone says. It is what they put their name on. Learn to read the difference, and no one will ever be able to take something from you without leaving a trail. She had been gone 5 years. Nadine heard her most mornings. She had met Marcus at a friend's birthday dinner 11 years ago, when she was 29 and he was 33, and she was in the particular season of her life when a certain kind of ease looks like a virtue rather than a surface. He was warm and expressive and laughed easily and had a way of making the person across from him feel like the conversation had been waiting specifically for their arrival. a quality she had found, in that first year, genuinely engaging, and had come to understand later as the most practiced thing about him. She had loved him in the complete, unguarded way she brought to most things she committed to. They had married 2 years after that birthday dinner, in a small ceremony at her cousin's house in Germantown, and the 7 years that followed had been ordinary in the way that good marriages are ordinary, not dramatic, not effortful, simply the shared navigation of a life. She had not had reason to audit the structure of it. She had not known she should, until the morning he sat across from her at this same table, his hands folded in the careful arrangement of a man preparing to deliver news he had rehearsed, and told her what the doctors had said. She had not believed him immediately. She was a paralegal. Her first instinct, in any situation with stakes, was to request the supporting documentation. He had produced it without hesitation. Letterheads, lab reports, a physician's name she verified against the Tennessee Licensing Board, a treatment plan from a specialist in Houston whose clinic she had found on a professional directory. She had spoken with the Houston specialist directly, or believed she had, in an 11-minute phone call that answered every question she asked with the measured fluency of a medical professional accustomed to delivering complicated news. The documentation was thorough. She had understood later that it had been thorough because Marcus had spent months in her professional orbit and knew, with a precision that served him, that she would read everything. She had read everything. She had believed everything. She had sold her grandmother's house. The first fracture had not announced itself. It arrived 3 weeks before the Tuesday morning at the gym as a question she could not stop returning to. Why, after 28 months of a terminal prognosis, did Marcus look better than he had the year before? She was not a medical professional and knew nothing about the specific clinical progression of the illness the documents described, but she had been watching him with the focused attention of a woman watching the person she loved most approach the end of his life, and what she observed in the last 6 weeks did not correspond with the trajectory she had been told to prepare for. He was sleeping, without the restlessness that had been his most consistent symptom. His color was different. He moved through the house with a physical ease that a genuinely declining body did not produce, not dramatically, not in any way she could point to as conclusive, but there, consistently, in the accumulated evidence of 100 small movements across 100 ordinary days. She filed every observation without drawing conclusions ahead of the evidence. Her grandmother had told her that the most common error in reading a contract was deciding what it said before you finished reading it. She applied the same discipline now. The pattern resolved itself on a Monday evening when she opened the trunk of Marcus's car to retrieve the grocery bags she had left there and found, beneath a moving blanket she did not recognize, a gym bag she had never seen, new sneakers, a water bottle with a facility logo, a membership card for a gym on the far side of the city, dated 4 months prior, with his name on it in the font of a membership system that stored active accounts. She did not take anything. She did not move anything. She replaced the moving blanket and closed the trunk and carried the groceries inside and made dinner and answered Marcus's questions about her day and went to bed at the usual hour. She lay in the dark for a long time. She let the shape of what she now knew organize itself into something she could act on with precision rather than feeling. She was done. She had simply not told him yet. She moved with the same deliberate calm that had always defined her. She followed him on a Tuesday morning, because Tuesdays were the days Marcus described as his better days, the ones when the fatigue was slightly reduced, when he would sometimes sit in the garden or move slowly through the kitchen with the carefully managed energy of a man conserving what remained. She had always been grateful for his better days. She had structured her life around them for 2 years and 4 months. She called in sick to work for the first time in 4 years using a voice she kept entirely level, and she drove across the city and parked 30 feet from the entrance of a facility she had never seen before, and she waited. He walked through the door at 8:14 in the morning, carrying the gym bag from the trunk, moving with the unhurried, easy stride of a man who had nowhere urgent to be, and a body that was doing exactly what he asked of it. Her hands did not shake. She sat in that car for 45 minutes. She photographed him through the windshield each time the glass doors opened, and the angle gave her a clear line of sight. At the free weights in a far corner, at a cable machine, at the water fountain where he tilted his head back and drank without the deliberateness of a man managing his intake. And finally, at a row of stationary bikes, where he rode for 20 minutes with the steady, settled rhythm of someone for whom this had become routine, whose body had fully accepted the demand and was no longer surprised by it. She photographed each one with the same steadiness she brought to everything that required her full attention. When he left, she did not follow him. She sat in the parking lot for 10 more minutes with her phone in her lap and the photographs in it, and she let the full weight of 2 years and 4 months of everything she had sold and surrendered and gone without a range itself in her mind into what it actually was. Not love's accounting, not the cost of devotion, but the ledger of a fraud, precise, documented, actionable. Then she called a number she had kept in her phone for 5 years without using it. Cécile Marchand had been Adizé Okonkwo's closest professional colleague for the better part of 2 decades. The woman who had sat in the front row at Adizé's retirement gathering and cried without apology, who had sent Nadine a handwritten note when Adizé died that said simply, "She taught me to read the whole document. Don't forget to do that." Cécile had moved, in the years since Adizé's retirement, from contract law into a combined civil litigation and victim advocacy practice, the kind of pivot that made sense to anyone who understood what her work had always actually been about. Nadine had not made an appointment. She had called from the parking lot and said 3 words, "I need you." Cécile had said, "Come now." That was the entirety of the conversation. She spread everything on Cécile's desk in the order it would need to be read. The photographs from the morning, date and time, stamped by her phone. The 2 years of bank transfer records she had printed before she left the house that morning, organized by date, cross-referenced against the treatment invoices Marcus had presented for each transfer. Every dollar traceable and documented. The physician's letterhead from the original diagnosis, the one she had kept in the household, files the way her grandmother had taught her to keep anything with a signature on it. The licensing board verification she had run in the first week of the diagnosis, and the re-verification she had run that same morning at the kitchen table. Before she drove to the gym, 2 searches of the same physician's name, 2 different results, because she now knew what to look for and where the record had been altered. And the phone number from the Houston specialist call, the one she had called and trusted and built her entire understanding of the situation upon, which resolved on a reverse lookup she had never previously thought necessary, to a prepaid mobile line with no registered owner, purchased 8 weeks before the diagnosis was delivered. Cécile read for 22 minutes. She turned each page fully before moving to the next. She made 4 notes. Then she looked up and said, "How long have you known?" "Since this morning," Nadine said. "Officially and unofficially. 3 weeks. I needed the full picture before I moved." Cécile set her pen down and looked at Nadine with the expression of a woman who had spent 30 years doing work that required her to be the steadiest person in difficult rooms. "I am sorry," she said. "This is a complete picture." She had worked alongside Adizé Okonkwo for 2 decades. She understood precisely what it meant when a woman who had been taught to build a complete picture finally had one in front of her. Real power operated in quiet rooms. What Cecile outlined over the following 2 hours was not a divorce proceeding. It was a criminal fraud case, and she built it from the document stack with the methodical clarity of a woman who had spent 30 years understanding the difference between a case that could be made and a case that could not be shaken. The transfers Nadine had made were fully documented and traceable. Bank records, wire confirmations, the treatment invoices Marcus had presented for each transfer, which collectively formed a paper trail that ran in one direction and bore one name throughout. That name belonged to a physician whose Tennessee medical license had lapsed 18 months prior and whose identity Marcus had appropriated from a publicly accessible professional database. The Houston Specialist Practice did not exist under the name on the letterhead, a name that appeared in no state licensing record, no professional directory, no insurance network anywhere in the country. The lab reports, which Nadine had read twice when they were delivered and believed both times, bore formatting inconsistencies she could see now with the clarity of someone who had spent 15 years reading documents and knew what a forged header looked like when she was no longer trying not to see it. The prepaid mobile line from the specialist call had been purchased at a retail electronics store on the south side of Memphis, and it was one of 4 such lines purchased from the same location across a 12-month window, all by the same buyer. All now flagged in a purchase record the store maintained for purposes unrelated to this case, but entirely useful to it. The total documented fraud, $214,000. 28 months. Every transfer initiated by Nadine in direct response to an invoice Marcus had produced and presented at this same kitchen table, in the same posture of a dying man asking only what he needed to survive. In Tennessee, Cecile explained, that total amount and that documented pattern placed the conduct in a category the district attorney's office handled directly. The consequences were not civil. They could not be negotiated away with a settlement figure. They were criminal, and they were specific, and they would not be reduced by anything Marcus said or agreed to after the fact. Cecile placed a call to her contact at the Dawes office while Nadine sat across the desk and continued organizing the documents into the sequence the case would need. They worked for 4 more hours. When Nadine finally stood to leave, the light outside had gone gray, and the document stack had become a formal referral package, and Marcus Okafor was 3 miles away in the house they shared. Sitting in the living room, she had stopped being able to furnish the way she wanted because there had been no money left for anything but what he needed, not knowing that the last ordinary evening of the life he had constructed was already behind him. Nadine drove home. She made dinner. She set it on the refinished table and sat across from Marcus and listened to him describe the fatigue, the way he always described it on the evenings when he wanted her to carry the weight of what they were supposedly enduring together, the practiced cadence of a man who had learned exactly how much detail made the story land. She asked 2 follow-up questions in the voice she had been using for 2 years and 4 months, the one that sounded like a woman managing her fear for the person she loved most. She cleared the plates. She said she was tired. She went to bed. She slept without difficulty, for the first time in longer than she could accurately recall. The investigators came on a Thursday morning at 7:15. Marcus was in the kitchen in his robe when they knocked. Nadine had known they were coming. She was already dressed, and she had been for an hour. She did not attend the formal proceedings. Cecile handled those, and Cecile was the kind of attorney who did not require her clients to be present for the moments that did not need them, who had, in 30 years of practice, become very precise about which moments those were. What Nadine received from Cecile's updates delivered in the clear and organized manner that Adeze had always used with the people she worked for was a complete accounting of how the case moved. Marcus had offered 3 separate explanations across 2 formal interviews with the investigators. The first explanation was that the documentation had been provided to him by a third party he could not now locate. The second was that he had been deceived himself, that someone had sold him fraudulent medical credentials, and he had genuinely believed they were authentic. The third explanation was the one his own attorney had advised him not to deliver, and he delivered it anyway, which said something about the particular desperation of a man watching a documentary record close around him in real time. All three collapsed against the record Cecile had assembled: the purchase trail on the prepaid phones, the licensing database showing the exact date the physician's identity had been accessed from a device registered to Marcus's home address, the bank records that showed the transfers requested and received in a pattern so deliberate it had its own architecture. His attorney reviewed the complete evidence package and communicated to him, in the language attorneys use when they have exhausted the available defenses, that his remaining options were the terms he accepted voluntarily and the terms a jury would decide for him. The distinction was not academic. He accepted terms in December. The plea agreement carried a sentence of 4 to 6 years, with the specific designation that the conduct involved sustained financial fraud against a spouse through fabricated medical documentation, placed him in a sentencing tier that carried no early release consideration in the first 30 months. The financial judgment attached to the plea included a restitution order for the full $214,000, secured by a lien on all of his current and future assets that took precedence over any other claim. The lien would follow him out of incarceration and remain active until it was satisfied in full. The gym membership Cecile mentioned at the end of one of their calls had been terminated when the billing card was frozen by the court order. She said it the way she said many things, factually, without emphasis, in the manner of a woman reporting what the record showed. Nadine noted it. She moved on. He called twice in the weeks that followed. She did not answer either call. She had nothing left to say to him that the documents had not already said more precisely than she could. Freedom was the real currency. She had been paying for it without knowing it, for 2 years and 4 months, and now it was hers outright and no one else's. 14 months later, Nadine sat at the refinished table in the kitchen of the apartment she had moved into the previous spring, smaller than the house had been, and quieter, on a block in Midtown Memphis where the morning came in through the east window and landed on the table's surface the way it always had, as though the light had simply followed the wood from one address to the next. The view was of a courtyard she had not expected to find restful, and had found restful from the first week: a fig tree in the center, a bench no one ever sat on, the particular stillness of a shared space that everyone had quietly agreed to leave alone. She was reviewing a brief for the senior partner she supported, a wrongful contract dispute involving a vendor agreement that had been amended twice without the amendments being properly initialed, which was the kind of irregularity that appeared minor in isolation and changed the entire case when you found it. She had flagged it in the first read. She had traced it to its origin in the third. The note she was writing now would tell the partner exactly where the document's integrity had broken and what it meant for the damages calculation. She did this work the way she had always done it, completely, without announcement, letting the record say what the record actually said. There was a man named Solomon who came on Friday evenings. He was a civil engineer Cecile had introduced at a professional gathering the previous autumn, with the particular deliberate casualness of a woman who was being deliberate and knew Nadine would recognize it as such. Solomon was methodical and direct, and asked questions that carried follow-up questions inside them, the kind of person who listened to an answer all the way to its end before he responded, who remembered what he had been told and referenced it accurately and without prompting. She had found this quality after 2 years and 4 months of sustaining a performance of devotion for an audience of one, something close to the first clean breath in a long time. He did not perform ease. He simply had it. in the way of a person who has not needed to construct anything about himself for someone else's benefit. The restitution payments had begun arriving in February, dispersed on the court-ordered schedule. Nadine had opened a separate account for them and had not touched the balance, because Cecile had told her she did not need to decide anything about it until she knew what she wanted it to mean. And she had not yet found the answer to that question. The retirement account was rebuilding at the rate available to her, steady, unspectacular. The compound arithmetic of consistent contribution that her grandmother had once described as the only kind of wealth that actually belongs to you. The second job had ended the month the investigators came to the door. She had not replaced it. Marcus was serving his sentence at a facility in western Tennessee. Cecile had this information and shared it when it became relevant to Nadine's financial planning, which was the only context in which Nadine wanted it. She registered it the way she had learned to register anything accurate, but no longer actionable, noted, placed in its correct file, and set down without carrying it further than the file required. She turned back to the brief and finished the note and closed the folder and sat for a moment at the table she had sanded and stained and sealed with her own hands in the apartment she had chosen for herself. In the life that was hers, in the way that only a life you have rebuilt from the actual bottom of things can be yours. She looked at the grain of the wood under her palms, the surface she had restored because she had been raised in a house where you did not discard what could be saved. She was solvent. She was free. She was unbothered. The document is not what someone says. It is what they put their name on. She had learned that from her grandmother, and she had paid a considerable price for forgetting it for 2 years and 4 months, and she would not forget it again. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.